As a coach, there is many instances when you need to provide feedback to your clients. So whether that's in your check-in process or whether it's providing feedback on how their week has gone. There's also times when you're going to have to approach difficult conversations with your clients, okay? And that's basically when there are certain behaviors that you think that might need to be addressed, or maybe when it's not they're not engaging as much in the program as you'd like them to. Now, when it comes to approaching feedback, I find that coaches tend to fall into two buckets. So think about which one you think you fall into. The first bucket is that coaches are sometimes too nice, and there's kind of that people-pleasing element. So here, we don't want to provide our clients with any feedback that's kind of critical, because we don't want to come across like we are critiquing them. We don't want to come across like we don't care about them. So that's the kind of first bucket that coaches fall into, the too nice approach. The second bucket that coaches typically fall into is almost like the tough love approach. And these coaches feel like it's on them, it's their responsibility to tell clients when they're not doing things right. Okay, so just think a little bit about what bucket you think that you might fall into. Maybe it's a mixture of both, but ultimately feedback is something that's really important for us to get right, because you are going to have to address things with clients, and ultimately coaching, parts of it is helping your clients to get through and overcome the obstacles that have kind of held them back before. So we've got to get good at delivering feedback. So in this session, we're going to talk a little bit about the most effective ways to deliver feedback, things that we definitely should be avoiding because it's not going to be helpful. So let's jump straight into it. The first thing to remember when it comes to providing feedback is that regardless of how we deliver it, it's going to be perceived as a threat by our clients, okay? Now, we're going to get a little bit sciencey here, but effectively in our brain, we have something called the amygdala, which is part of the limbic system. But what this is, it's basically a big alarm system in our brain. Now, through our five senses, we take in information, and then that information goes through this limbic system, and our brain is basically trying to figure out, is this thing a threat? So is this thing that it's perceived in the outside world going to be a threat? But the thing with our brains that can be super helpful and super unhelpful is that we also do things that come up in our own mind, and we perceive that as a threat or not as well. So things like our own thoughts, our own memories, predictions, images, all that kind of stuff also gets run through this same filter, and we ask ourselves, is this a threat? Now, when it comes to delivering feedback to our clients, like I said, regardless of how we deliver it or not, it is quite a threatening situation. There's been lots of psychologists, researchers who have shown that actually we perceive these kind of communication or emotional threats just like we would physical threats in the real world. And the reason for that is that if somebody is criticizing us, there's that real threat that we're going to be socially excluded, or maybe this person doesn't care about us anymore. Okay, so our brains really are trying to protect us. So this is something that we really need to keep in mind when we're going to deliver that feedback to our clients. Firstly, if they don't, happy days, right? If the thing that goes through our brain, it's not a threat, happy days, we're going to have that inner peace and calm, and we're going to have a really productive conversation. However, if it is being perceived as a threat, our clients are going to engage in that kind of that threat response, right? Which we would have heard of as fight, flight, or freeze. Now, what does this actually look like in terms of the coaching, and how are you going to know if you've activated your client's threat response? Well, if the client is engaging in a fight response, that would look something like when we deliver feedback, they're kind of arguing back, they're trying to defend themselves, they're kind of trying to give justifications to why they've done their behavior. They're not going to be able to accept the responsibility, and they're kind of trying to push it back onto you. So you might say to them, you weren't committed this week, and they might be saying, well, no, that's because you didn't do this and you didn't do that. Now, it's really important that we don't take this personally. All that happens here is that we realize that their threat system's activated. So the way that we've delivered the feedback has actually turned that system online. If they've engaged in a flight response, what this might look like is our clients ignoring our messages, okay? So they start ghosting you, they might stop engaging with us, and maybe they even quit the coaching, okay? That would be a flight response. So we've said something, or in general, our way of being, that relationship we have with them, is triggered that threat response, and so they've gone into the flight mode, and that's partly why people might be ghosting, or why they're kind of not engaging anymore. And then finally, that freeze response, what that looks like in clients is when, things seem to be going well, we've said something, and then suddenly they kind of stop opening up to us. They start doing the bare minimum, they kind of disengage a little bit, and that's because they've lost that trust in us, and they start becoming risk adverse. So whereas before they'd be willing to try things, now they're less likely to try things. Like I said, these are all an indication that our client's threat response has been activated. The biggest thing then is that when we're delivering feedback, we need to deliver it in a way that does not make it come across like a threat, so that our clients feel safe and they're going to be open to hearing what it is that we have to say so that we can actually help them. We are going to get into what this effective kind of delivery of feedback looks like, but before we do that, it's important to say there are really important reasons why we should provide feedback and why we shouldn't provide feedback. So let's touch on that, okay? Now, the reasons why we should not be providing feedback, or the wrong reasons, is firstly to excuse or defend your own behavior. So we shouldn't be kind of trying to say stuff to clients to defend ourselves. You know, well, no, I'm a good coach, so you should be doing this. That is not a good time to deliver feedback. Another thing, really quick, useful tool, we shouldn't be delivering feedback when we're in a bad mood. We all know, right? If you're in a bad mood, everything seems terrible and we're probably not going to come across the way we want to come across. So in that situation, we want to take ourselves out of the moment, take a few breaths, cool down for a bit, and then we might decide to deliver feedback when we've calmed down. We also shouldn't give feedback to kind of assert our dominance or to kind of prove that we're the coach. So we shouldn't be saying things to them like, well, you don't know what you're doing. That's why you're working with me. So, you know, you're clearly not doing this exercise right, and that's why you need a coach. That's why you need to listen. That's a really bad reason to give feedback. And a few more, right? We don't do it to put them in their place, to demoralize them, and we don't do them to show them why they need a coach. We can see quite clearly that if we approach feedback with these wrong reasons, of course it's going to get the client defensive. Of course it's going to activate that threat response in their brain. Okay, what are the right reasons to give feedback then? Well, these are the only times we should give feedback. When we actually genuinely care for the client and we're genuinely committed to helping them to progress and to actually change, then of course we have to provide feedback. Because if they're doing something that's not going to help them, then of course we need to step in and provide that feedback. Another right reason is because we have a sense of responsibility. So if a client, for example, has sent us a video of them doing an exercise and it's not looking quite right, then of course we have a sense of responsibility to that client to kind of correct them so that they don't get injured, and so that they're doing things the way that's the safest for them. Another couple of reasons why we should provide feedback is, of course, to support them and also to help them reach their goals. All right. So firstly, the first check you should do before you give feedback is, am I running it through the right filter? Am I doing it for the right reason? If not, don't bother. If yes, great. We can proceed to the kind of next step, which is talking about what is effective feedback and how do we actually do it. Now, really broadly, okay, destructive feedback is feedback that basically is going to damage that relationship and it's not going to lead to a response that's actually going to be helpful for the client. And this usually happens when we are being super critical of the person's personality or characteristics as opposed to the behavior. But let's talk about, more importantly, which is effective feedback. How do you do it right? And what kind of stuff do you need to be focusing on when you are delivering feedback to your clients? Be that in the check-in form or be that during the week when you're just chatting to them in general. Okay, so here are the core elements. The first one is that feedback needs to be timely. We need to be commenting on stuff that has happened really recently. It's not like, arguments with your partner that you might bring up stuff they did 2 years ago. Okay, with feedback, that's super ineffective. The further the distance away from the behavior, the less effective it's going to be as a form of feedback. So make sure it's timely. It's in the check-in. It's something that they've done right there and then we might comment on it. The second thing is that it has to be specific. So this works when we're giving like positive feedback or if we're giving constructive feedback. There's no point just saying, oh, you've done a great job. Like, well, what was great? That's not that helpful, okay? It's not specific enough. Same as if we say to a client, things weren't that great this week. Well, who's that going to help? Feedback, in order for it to be effective, have to be specific so a person knows exactly what behaviours that they can change and they know how. Feedback to be effective needs to be goal-oriented. When you get your check-in forms, there are so many things that you can comment on, right? There's like sleep and stress and nutrition and training and steps and all sorts of stuff. For it to be effective, just make sure that you're commenting on the things that's actually going to lead to their goal. If, for example, they're trying to have weight loss, it might not be as necessary for you to comment on other parts of their program that's not really that relevant. This one, we need to hone in on this one. This one is super important. When you are providing feedback, make sure that you focus on the behavior and not the character of the person. So, for example, you wouldn't say something like, you're just not committed, because that suggests that there's something wrong with that person and it brings like emotions into it. And of course, it's going to activate that threat system because they're going to take it personally because you are kind of attacking their personality. And also, if they're not committed, it's hard to change. What we would say instead is, this week, you didn't manage to do your 3 sessions. All right. So it's really more specific and it's the behavior and not the person. And then in that way, we're not damaging the relationship we have with them either. It's got to be future focused, so it's focusing on things that they can actually change moving forward. And then this final bit then is about having that optimum positive to constructive ratio. We've all heard of like the sandwich approach to feedback, yeah? Like you put a positive bit of feedback, then you put the negative stuff in the middle, then you put positive again at the end. Now, don't know about that, but it's really about the kind of ratios that we're talking about. We know that as humans, we have a bias to kind of negative feedback. We take it really personally. So we've got to make sure that we're giving far more praise than we are with the constructive side of things. But again, a lot of this also depends on the relationship that you've built with the client, right? If you have that safe space with them, if you have amazing rapport, if you're coming from the right place, it's far less likely they're going to take it as a threat, and you might even be able to be slightly more directive in your feedback. So that's even more reason why we also need to emphasize the relationship. Okay, so should we go through some examples then? Because I think that's going to help you to kind of go specific. And maybe you're thinking this and thinking, yeah, okay, Ella, let's have some examples. So let's get into it. If the scenario, for example, is a client and their goal is to drop body fat, they've checked in and they haven't adhered to their nutrition goals for that week. So what might we do? Well, destructive feedback might look like this. So I can see you have eaten more than your calorie target this week. You need to hit those macros next week to start seeing weight loss. Or something like, you don't seem committed to the process this week. You could definitely squeeze in more fruit and veg to feel satiated. Now, if we go back through that checklist on the previous slide, and you guys will have the download so you can go through it, just see which one of these, if you run it through that list, why it's not necessarily effective. Firstly, at times it's quite vague and it's not specific, and obviously in the bottom one as well, it's definitely attacking that person's almost character as opposed to their behaviour. And we're talking about things there that are not necessarily goal-oriented, like the fruit and veg stuff. Now, a more effective way to provide feedback when a client hasn't adhered would look something like this. Hey, I noticed on Monday through to Thursday, you really nailed your protein target. See how super specific that is, okay? I can see how much effort you're putting into this process. I noticed that on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, there was an increase in your calories. How do you feel about this? I'm aware that you're keen to drop body fat. How has this mapped onto your goal? Would you like to explore this in more detail? So can we see how that is far more effective than the first type? This is what's going to take your coaching, from being a good coach and maybe even a great coach to being an excellent or a masterful coach. Kind of that is what this is all about, right? Small tweaks that's going to make all the difference with your clients. So yeah, that is an example there of how that might be more useful. Now, how about an opposite scenario when actually the client has adhered? Because of course we're also giving positive feedback, right? And there are ways to do this that are more effective than others. So an ineffective way to give praise would look something like, you smashed it, great stuff, you should be so proud of yourself, more of the same this week. Now, it's not a terrible thing to say, like obviously they're going to like hearing that, but we know that we can improve on this because like we said, that is not specific. Okay, what about that have they done well? And also, when clients are doing well, a common mistake that I see from coaches is that we don't address the stuff that is helping it to go well. So sometimes when things are going well, we just say, okay, yeah, great, more of the same. But actually, it's a fantastic opportunity to dig in a bit more and to figure out, okay, well, why is it going well? Can we bring this forward? What skills are you using? And so that when things aren't going so well, the client can call upon that to help them move forward. So a more effective version then would be, what a week. I can see how you've really prioritized yourself and your goals. You've hit both your step and protein targets whilst enjoying the weekend away with your family. Okay, so way more specific, showing that you really care and that you've really paid attention to them. And then finally, we might end it something like, how did it feel for you this week? Can you reflect on what's helped you and to prioritize those things moving forward? So can you see then how that takes that beyond that more of the same? And that's actually going to be far more effective. Okay, we covered a lot of information there, so I definitely recommend that you take some time to go over that and digest it. But as you can see, in order for us to be excellent coaches and to really help our clients, we have to provide feedback. And the way that we do it, like we said at the start, is either going to be quite destructive, it's going to activate our clients' threat systems, it's going to make them more defensive, or if we kind of utilize some of this stuff, it's going to make our clients more open to hearing that feedback and ultimately take it on board.